brothers and sisters in this country, these here United States of America, and all over the world in the diaspora. My black African American brothers and sisters, and my black African brothers and sisters all over the world. I give you this good greeting. And I also give a good greeting to my white brothers and sisters, my true white brothers and sisters that are actually fighting against all forms of racism and oppression. My white brothers and sisters, my Asian brothers and sisters, my Native American brothers and sisters, my Latino and Latina brothers and sisters that are fighting for freedom, justice, and equality all over the world. Doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, as long as you fight for truth and justice and equality for all people, I can call you my brother or my sister. So, having said that, the reason that we are here today is to discuss a disturbing situation that is going on right now that involves the Tokyo Olympics 2021. There was a lot of talk about all of this so called Asian hate and Asian discrimination that was supposedly coming from the black community all over this country. They were attempting to say that this was some sort of an issue, which it is not an issue, because I've stated over and over again, and most of you know from your own personal experience that you have some sort of Asian store in your community or neighborhood, and most of you regularly patronize these places, giving them your money and your business. You support these stores. Um, I have supported these stores and restaurants in my distant past, but many of these stores do not do anything to help our communities. I said once before that I never see them sponsor any community barbecues where they give away free book bags and school supplies. I never see them offer any scholarships to the neighborhood children for college. I don't see them opening up any college funds, and I don't think these things are outside of the realm of the expected when we actually put their children through college. We actually are the main source of their income when it comes to them taking care of their families and prospering in this country. We support their stores. So, in some way, shape, or form, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that they should give back to the community in some way, shape, or form. But what I have recently seen on the worldwide stage with regard to Asian and Asian and African American relations, and Asian and simply Black African relations, period, it has not been too favorable. We've heard story after story about how Africans have been kicked out of their homes in China and demonized and marginalized and made to be the epicenter of the coronavirus cases. We've seen several instances of Asian hate toward blacks in those black countries in Africa, in their own countries. We've seen them open up houses of prostitution. We've seen them tell black people in black countries and black lands that they can't go certain places where these Asians are doing business. We've seen this over and over again. If you're paying attention to the news, if you actually do research, many of these things are not going to be showcased on the mainstream news feed, CBS, NBC, ABC, this sort of thing. You actually have to look at the internet and read the internet news to actually be aware of most of these things. You should know by now and understand that whatever they give you on CBS, NBC, and ABC is mostly bullshit. You have to actually go search and find if you want to get the full scope of worldwide news. Now, there is a huge story as far as the Tokyo Olympics is concerned. Tokyo is in Japan. Japan is an Asian country. Okay? Everyone knows this. Now, the first major story here is that the Tokyo Olympics has put some serious restrictions on who can protest and how they can protest. Uh, and they're hiding behind the International Olympic Committee's rules and regulations. They're saying that certain types of protesting is restricted or banned. And this in the climate of black people protesting all over the world against violence and oppression at the hands of white supremacy and all forms of supremacy coming from any group of people. Black people are at the forefront right now of protesting. So any restrictions that are being placed on protests are going to hugely negatively impact black people. We know this. So let's take a look at a news story regarding protesting and the Japan Tokyo Olympics. Japan to ban all Black Lives Matter apparel from the Olympics. So that's simply banning protest clothing that makes any type of a political protesting statement. But they have also put restrictions on protesting in general. And it says that this is PolitiFact, a known institution that is known for not really being above board, in my opinion. It's really a fraudulent institution. But many people put their stock and their faith in PolitiFact. So I'm going to use PolitiFact since a lot of people use PolitiFact as a debunking source. I don't put any confidence in PolitiFact personally, but it is one source that we have to use, and there will be others that we dig into as well today. They call themselves fact checking. Did Japan ban all Black Lives Matter? When they fact check, they normally try to debunk anything that makes white supremacy look bad. They try to debunk anything that could throw any type of negative light on a pharmaceutical company or Bill Gates and other individuals that are a part of the establishment. That's why I don't put any confidence in PolitiFact. But we're going to use it for today because they present some information outside of who they are. They present some information that is actually factual here. Did Japan ban all Black Lives Matter apparel from the Olympics? Japan has banned all Black Lives Matter apparel from the Olympics. No one can kneel or raise fists in anthems either. PolitiFact says this ruling is half true. So they say there is some truth, half of it is true. Here's why. Protests by athletes during sporting events have long been a point of contention in the public eye. Some detractors say athletes should stick to sports, while supporters say they should be able to use their platform to spread awareness of an issue. Ahead of this year's Olympics, scheduled to begin July 23rd, a Facebook post claims Japan has prohibited athletes from making any political expression during the Tokyo Summer Games, including wearing clothing that says Black Lives Matter. Japan has banned all Black Lives Matter apparel from the Olympics, the June 20 post reads. No one can kneel or raise fists during the anthems either. I'm proud of Japan, some racist wrote. I'm proud of Japan for attempting to censor and ban a political protest. Once again, Asians are not supporting black people all over the world. The post was flagged as part of Facebook's efforts to combat false news and misinformation. The post is wrong in that it isn't up to the host country to set what rules athletes have to follow while participating in the games. Instead, that's the responsibility of the International Olympic Committee. I told you before, Tokyo, Japan, which is an Asian country, is attempting to hide behind the rules and regulations of the International Olympic Committee. Don't blame us, it's their fault. However, the International Olympic Committee has a provision in its charter called Rule 50, which prohibits athletes from making any sort of political expression, particularly on medal podiums in the field of play and at opening and closing ceremonies. The rule does not target a particular movement or ideology. We're not targeting anyone in particular. This is just the blanket rule. This is the statement that comes from the International Olympic Committee. But I'm going to show you why that's bullshit later on. No kind of demonstration or political, religious, or racial propaganda is permitted. Racial propaganda. So racism, white supremacy, Asian supremacy, Arab supremacy, supremacy coming from all Jewish supremacy, it's all propaganda. None of it is true. They call it racial propaganda. And it's permitted in any Olympic sites, venues, or other areas. A version of Rule 50 has been in place in the International Olympic Committee's charter since at least 1975. Now, this is important. 1975. They came up with this rule that you can't protest. Maybe it's because of this. Does anybody remember this? You see this? This took place in 1968. These black brothers holding a black fist in the air in protest of white supremacist violence, racism, and oppression toward black people. They're also protesting the white savage violence and disgusting oppression of black people all over the continent of Africa. South Africa in particular, they're protesting apartheid. This protest was done in 1968. And this white man who decided to stand next to them, because he could have decided not to stand next to them, he could have walked off of the podium, but apparently this white man held the view that all humans should be created equal. There should be no such thing as supremacy of any kind. Okay? This white man. Now let me get Tommy Smith was his name. Let's see. No. Tommy Smith was one of the brothers here. Tommy Smith and John Carlos are these two brothers here. Peter Norman is the white gentleman here. Peter Norman. Now, Peter Norman's career was totally derailed and demolished, destroyed when he went back to Australia. His white brothers and sisters blackballed him, would not select him for any other Olympic competitions ever again. And this white man suffered from depression and all other types of illnesses as a result of his mental state and how he was treated when he went back to his home country. And let's see what the article says about exactly that. Okay. It says, when Carlos and Smith, the two black men, were both gradually reaccepted into the Olympic fold because they hated on them as well. They were mad because they protested white people in this country. So they had to be gradually reaccepted into the Olympic fold. But they went on to careers in professional football before retiring. Meanwhile, Peter Norman, this man here, the white man that stood beside them, he was punished severely by the Australian sports establishment. Australia was a highly racist country at that time, and still it is to this very day, okay? This white supremacy and racism is all over the fucking place. So his own white brothers and sisters in the country of Australia punished him severely, okay? He qualified for other Olympic teams over and over again, posting the fastest times by far in Australia, and he was snubbed by the team in 1972. Rather than allow Norman to compete, the Australians did not send a sprinter at all. This is how simple-minded, cowardly, and cruel these white people were to their own brother. They would deprive themselves of a gold medal in that competition by not sending anybody at all when they could have sent this white man here because he was the fastest person in Australia at the time. Australia said, fuck it. If we got to send his ass, we ain't sending nobody at all. This is the simple-minded, savage mindset of racist white people. And you white people should be embarrassed at your behavior because it's the most simple-minded, savage, primitive, cowardly mindset of all fucking time that you did this to this man. Norman immediately retired from the sport and began to suffer from depression, alcoholism, and painkiller addiction. During that time, writes Caroline Frost for the BBC, he used his silver medal as a doorstop. If they're going to treat me like this, I'm going to use this shit as a doorstop. Norman died without ever being acknowledged for his contributions to the sport. Though he kept his silver medal, he was regularly excluded from events related to the sport. Even when the Olympics came to Sydney, Australia in 2000, he was not recognized when the Olympics came to his home country. Disgusting and disgraceful. When Norman died in 2006, Carlos and Smith, who had kept in touch with Norman for years, were pallbearers at the Australian man's funeral. Disgusting. Now, this protest took place in 1968. And what did the Olympics do? In 1975, a short time after those protests, they came out with a rule that tried to limit and ban protesting. So when Dr. John Henrik Clarke, this man here, tells you that you have no fucking friends, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, the great master teacher, the great black African-American great master historian, professor at Hunter College, and teacher, when he tells you you have no friends, you have no fucking friends. You are the target of racism of every fucking group. Every fucking body hates you to one degree or another. And they've shown it. Throughout the history of the world, they've shown it in one way or another. And we're going to get to this man and we're going to listen to his lecture because his lecture is very important. So let's go to the next area. Banning black swim caps at the fucking Olympics. Banning black swimmers from wearing swim caps that accommodate their hair type. This is in the New York Times, lest you think I'm using a bullshit source. This is from the New York Times. Although the New York Times at times is full of bullshit, you can find this story in many different newspaper articles. This is widely known how they've banned black swim caps. They've banned black swimmers from using swim caps that can accommodate dreadlocks, braids, at large afros, and thick African hair. They banned them at the fucking Olympics. Now these games are in Tokyo, Japan, an Asian country. If you think the country that the Olympics is being held in has no influence on what goes on at the Olympics, you are a fucking fool. If you think it's totally up to some international Olympic committee of people and they can just bully and dictate all types of restrictions and terms to the hosting nation, when that hosting nation is spending billions of dollars themselves to host these Olympics, the hosting nation, that country, spends billions. You don't believe me? Let's take a look. Hosting the Olympics is a bad deal. Even in normal times, the games don't pay off, argues an economist. Let's take a look at how much money Japan is spending on the Olympics. Tokyo initially said it would spend $7.3 billion. That's a whole hell of a lot of money on some damn Olympics. But a 2019 government audit put the actual spending at around $28 billion. 28 billion dollars to host the Olympics. And you think this Asian country can't say, look, we're spending damn near $30 billion on this shit. You don't tell us what our athletes can do, how they can protest. As long as they're being peaceful, they can demonstrate in a peaceful way as much as they want. We're spending $30 billion for this shit. Olympic Committee, who do you think you are? If you think the hosting nation that is spending $30 billion doesn't have any say-so, if you think the hosting nation doesn't have any say-so as to what goes on in their country, then you're a fool and you're incredibly naive. Of course they do. They could come out with all kinds of press releases and all kinds of statements with how that represent how they feel and their position on protesting, on black swim caps, African American swim caps. But let's get back to that racist ass policy being implemented as far as the swim caps are concerned. We want to get back to that. How a ban on a swim cap galvanized black swimmers. This is so much bigger than banning a type of cap, said Leah Neal, a two-time Olympic medalist for the U.S. I don't know if that's her or not, but that looks like one of the swim caps. They tried to say that this could potentially give the black athletes some type of advantage, making them more aerodynamic in the water. How the fuck is that the case if their hair is big and bulky and it's a larger cap? It's more material in the water. How the hell is that wouldn't a smaller, tightly fit cap be more aerodynamic on a white person's head? If it actually hugs their head and their scalp more? Wouldn't this be somewhat of a disadvantage for a black person to have that much hair? This is some racist bullshit. Ahead of the Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo, which begins later this month, or I think it's already on right now, the members of the International Swimming Federation, known as FINA, F-I-N-A, are reconsidering a ban they put on a swim cap designed for black hair. They've been reconsidering it, and they have not rescinded it. They have not lifted it. There are no news stories that say that they have lifted it. This product, called Soul Cap, is meant to accommodate thicker, curlier hair textures to provide a better fit and protect hair from chlorine. Because black hair defies gravity and it grows upward, it can stand straight up. It stands up, it's thick, it grows upward. They need a swim cap that can accommodate black hair. And chlorine is much more damaging on a black person's hair than it is on a white person's hair. Because white people tend to have more oily hair. And they're discriminating against Soul Cap. I wonder why. They say that their governing body is currently reviewing the situation with regards to the Soul Cap and similar products, understanding the importance of inclusivity and representation. This change comes after backlash and an interview in which the founders of Soul Cap told the BBC that FINA's rationale behind the initial decision was that athletes competing at the international events never used, neither were required to use, caps of such size and configuration, and that the Soul Cap does not follow the natural form of the head. These racist sons of bitches in the Olympic swimming area said that this cap does not follow the natural form of the head. Who the fuck do these people think they are? The natural form of whose head? The first head that touched the ground, the first head to show itself on the face of the earth was a black African head. Show some fucking respect. The first face and head to show itself on the face of the earth was a black African head, not a white European or Asian head. Show some fucking respect. FINA's statement from July 2nd said that the governing body is committed to ensuring that all aquatics athletes have access to appropriate swimwear for competition where this swimwear does not confer a competitive advantage, which it does not. These are the brothers that came out with the company and designed the swim cap right here. The brothers that they are hating on and discriminating against. This is your fucking Olympics that you Negroes are involved in right now. Is it time for black athletes to boycott the Olympics? Because they're, this racism, oppression, and discrimination is rearing its ugly head once again. It's rearing its ugly head once again. What should we do about this? What should our athletes do about this? The young lady, what was her name? Sha'Carri Richardson, she smoked weed. She should have been smart enough not to smoke fucking weed before the competition. I don't care what her excuse was. If you're a black person, you already know they're looking to get you. If you're a black person, you should already know that your ass needs to be squeaky clean because they're out to get you, Sha'Carri Richardson. So she got kicked off. She got kicked out of the Olympics. And then she got kicked off of the Olympic relay race team, so she won't be running at all because she wanted to smoke some weed. Mind you, smoking weed garners you no type of physical advantage, doesn't make you run faster, doesn't help you as an athlete, but you know that they are looking for any and everything to make you look bad. Why are you giving them the opportunity, Sha'Carri Richardson or Sha'Carri Richards? Excuse me if I have the name wrong. You know who I'm talking about. But is it time to start boycotting these games? Maybe Africa should hold its own games. Maybe Black America should hold its own games. Maybe all these black Americans with all this money should put their money together and come out with their own fucking football league. Maybe we should do things on our own here and make it 10 times better than everyone else's if they want to discriminate against us, if they want to oppress us, if they want to single us out, make examples of us. Ridiculous examples that have no basis in logic or real application. Maybe it's time to do these things. You know what it's time to do now? Now it's time to take a listen to our great master teacher, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Once again, master historian and professor at Hunter College in New York. Dr. John Henrik Clarke is no longer with us. He has passed on, but his fantastic teachings and lectures and his energy lives on through his sons and daughters all over the world like me and others. We're going to listen to this man's lecture, and I'm going to give you my critique in certain selected areas. But pay close attention to what this master historian and great ancestor has to say about who and what you are and what you need to do. Pay attention. You have no friends. One of Dr. John Henrik Clarke's most masterful lectures.
They didn't pick me up to go to the assignment. I followed their instructions and waited at the hotel. I would love to be here when I can be more fully in depth on this subject, because there's a whole lot of illusions about Africa's relationship with other people in the world. There's a whole lot of illusion about our relationship to the religions in the world. And these belief systems that had its origin in Africa, all of them, and there is no exception, turned on African people. I said there is no exception. And there's one thing you have to get through your mind and keep it. Nothing that ever came from the European mind was meant to do anything but facilitate European domination of the world. And I said there's no exception. Everything that was brought into this continent, everything, every idea, every so-called religion was meant to dominate and to control.
Okay, everything, every religion, Judaism for Jews, Christianity for Christians, and Islam for Muslims. Although you black people keep thinking that Islam is supposedly the so-called religion of the black man. Nonsense. They were your first slave masters. If you know your history, you know this and you understand this. They were the first people to remove your testicles and your penis. They removed the testicles and the penises of our African male ancestors to prevent their Arab women from desiring them. Facts. Facts. And at a later date, I'll be pulling up the sources to prove it. Let's continue.
The Arabs had no illusions about it. The Europeans had no illusions about it. You were the ones with the illusion. Every idea, every so-called religion was meant to dominate and to control. The Arabs had no illusions about it. The Europeans had no illusions about it. You were the ones with the illusions.
The Arabs had no illusions.
And yet every element that went into the making of every major religion in the world started in Africa. Why is it?
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. And I'm going to rewind that a little bit. The making of every religion started out in Africa. But they were never called Judaism or a Hebrew faith. That comes from Western Asia. Those people came out of Western Asia and came into Africa. Contrary to what these pseudo-historians want to tell you, that Hebrews originated in Africa, the real Jews came out of Africa. No. The Hebrew faith originated, Hebrews come out of Western Asia, not Africa. And I'll get back to that later on as well. But this man just told you that he's a professor of history, okay? So he knows what he's talking about. He dedicated his whole life to black African history, okay? He said all three major religions, Judaism for Jews, Christianity for Christians, and Islam for Muslims, all have their roots and origin in Africa. What that means is they took the tenets of African spirituality and they convoluted them and polluted them and turned them into something totally different and called it Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the foundation that they drew from was an African foundation, and that's what he's trying to say. But while it was in Africa, we didn't call the shit Judaism, we didn't call the shit Christianity, and we didn't call the shit Islam. We didn't call it any of that. It was simply African spirituality.
Every element that went into the making of every major religion in the world started in Africa. Why is it that you are so naive? You let people redress something that you invented, sell it back to you, and enslave you through it. I'm saying that all organized present religions are male chauvinist murder cults. And I say there is no exception.
Why does he say that? All of the major religions are merely male chauvinist murder cults? Because all three religions omit the woman out of their godhead. They all have male gods. when the most powerful creator that you or I know, and I've said this before, is a woman? The most powerful attribute of any God would be to create new life. And if you look at a man or a woman, the one that is the most powerful with regard to the creation of new life is not the man, it's the woman. But he says that all three major religions are male chauvinist murder cults because they're all male dominated. They look at women as objects for the most part. There are even passages in the Bible where the woman is looked upon as being property of the man. Okay? There is no recognition that if there's going to be a male God, that there has to be a female God by his side that you need to be worshiping, because a man can't create any fucking thing on his own. He needs the main source of creation, which is the woman. But none of these religions recognize the woman as being a God that is equally as powerful as any man God. None of them. That's why he says they're male chauvinists. And murder cults, why does he say murder cults? Because all three of these religions in their own literature actually chronicle how God actually condones the mass murder of massive amounts of people for one reason or another. Murder is okay when it comes to the Jewish God, the Christian God, and the Islamic God. Sanctioned murder is acceptable. You read your own books, you can look through it. You'll see information about how God sponsors massive army incursions and massive battles where massive amounts of people get killed. That's why he says they're murder cult. And are all of those people guilty? Are all of those people savages? There's one passage in the Bible where God says, go slaughter the whole damn country or village, man, woman, child, and animal alike. You look it up, it's in there. You need to really read your Bible and understand what's in it. You need to really read your Quran and understand what's in it and how women are treated and how they're looked at. That's why it's male chauvinistic. I want to let the doctor continue.
Well, I wanted to be here early. I wanted to deal with our relationship with the people of the world and the fact that we created peaceful nations that had no word for jail because no one had ever gone to one. No word for old people's home because no one ever threw them away, grandma and grandpa. No word for orphanages. We did all of this, and over half of human civilization was over before we knew that a European was in the world. Before he wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window. Now, Africa has always and still is the prize for the whole world. We as a people have always been the world's richest people, culturally rich, mineral rich. We have always been the prize because we have always had and still have something that other people won't, think they can't do without, and don't care to pay for. Because we have always been the prize, we have been under siege for over 3,000 years. Nothing that ever brought into Africa from the outside was meant to do the African any good. That means all other religions. Islam was the handmaiden of Arab imperialism. Christianity was the handmaiden of European imperialism. The Hebrew faith was the handmaiden of a concept called the chosen people. Now, if God is kind and God is merciful and God has no stepchildren, he won't choose one over the other. And to say he chose some people, you're making him a bigot. And to say that he endorsed enslavement of one people over the other, you're making him an accessory to murder. The Arabs used Islam to rationalize their slavery and their imperialism. The Europeans used Christianity to rationalize their slavery and imperialism. Who are you kidding about friends in the world? Damn it, if you want a friend, look in the mirror. There's 1 billion African people on the face of this earth. Why are you buying third-rate junk from third-rate people thinking you can't make it? Why don't you at least make a safety pin to hold your child's diaper together? Teach. Who has programmed your mind into thinking you can't make a car? The first man that made a car that had never seen one previously. The Japanese bought cars, bought locomotives, broke them down and studied them, and had a Japanese technician produce each piece, put it together, and had a much better train than the one they copied from. All knowledge in the world belongs to everybody in the world. Yes. Who has programmed our mind in assuming that we cannot run a nation and run it well? The main thing imperialism did, slavery and imperialism, they removed African people from the respectful commentary of history. And they tell them something they are still telling them, and all of the organized religions are guilty of this. I favor none of it because Africa didn't need any of it. I'm saying that African belief systems, properly understood, is 10 times better than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Woo!
And
woo! I gotta give it a Ric Flair woo. 10 times better than all three of those. All three of them. The original source. I love it. Let me hear him say it again. Let me hear him say it again. Say it again, would you please, Dr. Clark?
Did slavery and imperialism. They removed African people from the respectful commentary of history. And they tell them something they are still telling them, and all of the organized religions are guilty of this. I favor none of it because Africa didn't need any of it. I'm saying that African belief systems, properly understood, is 10 times better than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And better for the African. Now you might have some romance with one of these religions. I have no romance with any of them. I have a romance with reality and truth. And the chips can fall where they may after I tell it. As for friends, you have had no friends. When they discovered you, they began to prey on you. Now let's look at our relationship with Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. For 3,000 years, our greatest enemies came from Western Asia. They were trying to avenge the fact that they were once African colonies. You read a book called When Egypt Ruled the East, and you get some of the basic information on this. Now, the first visitors to Africa came in the 1700s BC. These were the people who would later be called Hebrews. Now, black people are ticklish on this because black people think that everything in the Bible is true. I question the intelligence of anyone who thinks everything in the Bible is true or supposed to be true. It's allegory, stories told to illustrate a point at a time.
It's allegory. Stories told to illustrate a point. Stories. Stories, not facts. Stories. People walking on water, taking 2 loaves of bread and a couple of fish and feeding thousands of people. What? What? Now he's talking about the people, the so-called Hebrews, the original Jewish people that entered into Kemet. Kemet is Egypt's real name, Kemet. Kemet means the black land or black nation. That is Egypt's real name, Kemet, Kemet. The Arabs that you see there now are not Egyptians, they're Arabs. They are the descendants of invaders that invaded our motherland, took power through Islam, used that as a directive from God to say that their God gave them the right to do the shit that they did. Facts. But he's talking about some invaders that came long before the Islamic invaders came. He's talking about the first Hebrews, which are the Jews, that came peacefully, that were starving. They were starving. They used to be a colony of Africa, a colony of Egypt, but they came in, they were wandering around. They wandered into Africa, starving. The African pharaohs, that same pharaoh that you keep believing was the bad guy, well, he's the one that fed the Hebrews, gave them some land, fed them. Later on, those same Hebrews or Jews would take sides with their brothers that came sometime later on down the line. These same people were called Hyksos. Hyksos means shepherd kings. Hyksos, the shepherd kings. They also came from the same area that the original Hebrews came from. They spoke the same language. The Hebrews or Jews that were already in Africa took sides with those invaders, and they overthrew Kemet, and they ruled it for about 100 years. But he's not going to get into all of that. I get into all of that on my website, and I'll talk about that later on. But he's talking about the first group of invaders to come into Africa, which were the Hebrews.
When there were very few people reading books. And most of what went into the making of the Bible was copied from Egyptian texts. Now, if you want to get so dewy-eyed over the Bible, which is a carbon copy of a carbon copy, why don't you go back and read the original Egyptian text?
But the original Egyptian text is not going to say anything about any Jesus Christ or any Moses or any Abraham or any Allah. It's going to speak in strictly African terms. It's going to show you and teach you about where they get all of this stuff from. That's all of these things that you refuse to learn. When people like me try to tell you that there are other things out there for you to learn. There are facts, historical facts out there for you to learn about your religion and where it comes from. But you refuse to learn it. It doesn't matter how long you spent in Christianity. It doesn't matter that your mother put you or your father put you in Islam. It doesn't matter how long you've been a Hebrew Israelite. I don't care if you get this information on your deathbed at 90 years old. If you're able to crack open a book and learn the truth and open up your mind, you need to do it. You need to do it.
You see where all these stories started from. You see where the story of the Exodus started from. Now you can so do it. I do actually think there was an Exodus. These people walked into Africa. Why couldn't they walk out? Why did they have to go by sea? No. Why did the sea have to part? If you read Egyptian literature, you will discover that the whole story of somebody parting the sea started with about 3,000 years before the Hebrew entrance. I should not use the word Hebrew entrance, before the entrance from Western Asia. Now let's get one thing straight, because black people are confused about all religions. Now I'm not against any religion. I'm a very spiritual human being. I just don't need a preacher to preach no 10 Commandments to me when he's a backslider going with some sister, some other man's wife. I'm intelligent enough to pick from the 10th commandment, we have not commandments anyway, but they were omissions of purity at the great school at Loxo.
Okay, when he says the 10 commandments were not commandments anyway, once again, he's talking about what I talk about all the time. the 42 declarations of the 42 declarations of innocence of Ma'at. Okay? Also known as the 42 negative confessions. This is where the 10 Commandments come from. But they were thousands of years before the 10 Commandments. When the Hebrews came into Egypt, they were privy. All of this information was revealed to them. The 42 declarations of innocence. There are 42 of them. Okay? They state that I have not killed. I have not slept with another man's wife. I have not stolen. I have not lied. Okay? That's where thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. That's where all that stuff comes from. But we did it first. And it was not called the 10 Commandments, and nobody named Moses gave them to us. It was a black African goddess Ma'at in Africa. Her 42 negative confessions, or her 42 declarations of innocence, started in Africa thousands of years before any 10 Commandment story. Facts. This is what he's talking about now.
Luxor, great African training school. All right, now, let's get into this Western Asia. I'm saying that the people who came from Western Asia escaping famine did not have any Hebrew faith when they came into Africa. And there's no record of a Hebrew faith before there. Why is it that when they left?
For those of you that are confused, the Hebrew faith is the Jewish faith.
Africa, in the so-called Exodus, they had all three. African culture, and who came from West intelligent enough to pick from the 10th commandment, we were not commandments anyway, but they were omissions of purity at the great school at Luxor, the great African training school. All right, now, let's get into this Western Asia. I'm saying that the people who came from Western Asia escaping famine did not have any Hebrew faith when they came into Africa. And there's no record of a Hebrew faith before there. Why is it that when they left Africa in the so-called Exodus, they had all three? African culture, an African religion, and an African language. Now look at the origin of the so-called people you now refer to as Jews. And you're mistaken using that reference because the word Jew is of European origin. And the people in Europe who call themselves by their name have no relationship to the biblical people of the Hebrew faith. And I'm saying that the people we now call Jews entered world history with their visit to Africa. And when Africa was invaded, 1675 BC, instead of joining the Africans who had been their beneficiary and saved them from starvation, they joined the enemies of Africa. No one has ever returned any favors to us. As a people, we have always been hospitable to strangers, mostly the wrong strangers. And what we have to understand now, in the period of superior brainwashing, is there is no European answer for African problems. Either Africans find a solution to African problems or there is no solution, and if you don't find a solution soon, you go back into slavery. We have to stop all of this nonsense about who belongs to what religion when all of them were imposed on us in the first place. We stop all this fight between Muslims and Christians when neither one of the religions are doing them any good or moving them toward independence. All of them are handmaids of conquerors. All of them are religions of conquerors. We were naive when we accepted their interpretation of something that we had all along. I'm saying we need to take a good look at ourselves. I'm not talking about burning churches. I'm not talking about getting rid of religions. Understand me well. I am saying that every single thing that touches your life, religious, socially, and politically must be an instrument of your liberation, or you must throw it into the ash can of history. Develop a liberation Islam. Yes. And if you develop a liberation Islam, you have to turn on the supreme slave traders who were in the slave trade 1,000 years before the Europeans, the Arabs. Yes. And most brothers who think they're Muslims are merely Arabists. Forerunners, vanguards of Arab propaganda. The Arabs are not above joining the Jews against black people. In America, they're already doing it in Detroit. In America, they're already doing it in real estate. You got some dewy-eyed thing that you got a friend. I still ask you to look at that mirror. And if nothing staring back at you is friendly, then you've got no friend. But this is where you start friend. All right. I'm saying something which you need to reconsider. I'm saying that everything that came into Africa, every people that came into Africa, did not come to do Africa any good. Everyone and every religion and every people who came into Africa declared war on African cultures. They began the bastardization of African people, created confused mulatto who didn't know whether he's to be loyal to his mother's people or his father's people. That confusion is still here. The fascination for the color of the conqueror and the fascination to go to bed with the conqueror. Now that's raw and mean, but it's true. Now, some time ago, a North African leader, Gaddafi, was sending some Libyans to study in Europe. And he told them what any good nationalist would tell students going to study: I'm not sending you to Europe to find a wife. I'm sending you to Europe to gain the technology to come back and make Libya a strong nation, a strong Islamic nation, and a strong Arab nation. And you cannot achieve any of this between the legs of a European woman. When is somebody going to get strong enough to tell Africans going to school, you're going to come back home and pair up with a sister, but if you want to pair up over there, stay over there. Now, the one thing we have to look at, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to conclude on this because I've left out a body of information. At the university, I teach an entire course, semester course, on Africa's relationship to other people. And I devote several semesters to Africa before Europe, the consequences of the coming of the Greeks, who stole a lot that they think is their culture, stole a lot that you think is Greek philosophy. We've been the victims of propaganda. And yet, if you read the Journal of African Civilization, other works, we have lived in Europe, we've lived in Asia, we've lived in the Americas. The African people have already proved that they can get along with different people, amalgamate their culture with different people without one hint of a war between us. People who come into Africa immediately declare war on African culture, standards of beauty, standards of conduct, and change the African concept of theirs so they can rule through him. This was true of the Greeks, who began the bastardization, again, the European bastardization of Africa. The Western Asians had begun it 3,000 years before that. The Romans, a bunch of well-dressed thugs who could write well but couldn't think, who borrowed practically everything. They laughed at the Africans' concept of Christianity. The African was practicing and not giving it a name. This is why you don't know nothing about the African origins of Christianity. This is why a whole lot of people will not read Ben Yakinen's The African Origins of the Major Western Religions, Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, a Black Man of the Nile. Because he's telling it like it is, but you also will not read white radicals who identified Africa as the origin of the great religions of the world, especially Alvin Boyd Kuhn in his work, Who is This King of Glory? In Shadow of the 3rd Century. We have dealt with John Jackson, another radical black historian, with man, God, and civilization. We let some of our great scholars die in hunger, die wanting for friendship. Now, having devoted my greater portion of my life to scholarship and teaching and digging up information on African people and trying to make African people face reality, I have often said, a point that I wish you to consider, I didn't have to do it. I chose to do it. And if I had to do it over again, I would do it better. But I have a lot of talent other than the talent to teach and to research. I've never met a rich man who had a better mind than me. So if I wanted to succeed as a rich man, I could have done that. I never met a crook who wasn't a fool. I could have been a good crook if I chose to be a crook. I chose to be a teacher of African history. I chose to look in the Bible where I couldn't find my people. I started looking for them in the world, and I didn't stop until I found them. And I know why they are left out of the Bible. I know why all the angels are white. You mean to tell me God is merciful, God is kind, and not one little brown or black angel sneaked into heaven? I ain't buying that. Now the Bible that you get so dewy-eyed over is one of the greatest pieces of propaganda ever written. If you want to read the Bible,
one of the greatest pieces of propaganda ever written. Propaganda is informational literature that is mostly false, that is created to push or promote an agenda or movement by one group of people to gain power or influence over another. Propaganda.
Why don't you read the Bible one day and read Mein Kampf the next day and see the comparison? That's hard on your mind. Because you think if you don't have Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, you don't have to have spirituality. I've got more spirituality after I put all of them down. And I've got more religion after I put all of them down. All right, now let me conclude something that has no conclusion. We have to look at the impact of Europeans on Africa. All impacts have been negative. The Romans laughed at the early African Christians. Finally, for political reasons, they stopped killing Christians and became Christians. I'm saying the Europeans became Christians for political reasons, as the Arabs became Muslim for political reasons, and as the so-called Jews became Hebrews for political reasons. People use organizations for political reasons, and what we get so dewy-eyed and think we're dealing with the truth. If you look at indigenous African belief systems, if you look at the idea when Africans had no churches of any consequence because these fools came here and said, this is the house of God, and the African looked at that church and said, if God who made the wind, the spring, made the ocean roar, and you're going to tell me he can fit into a little thing you call a church? That is no house of God. So some Africans had the common sense enough to move away from it, and some had the common sense to burn it down. I'm saying that you're closer to God when the further away you get away from organized religions that are all handmaidens of conquest. The Roman Empire developed during the early period of Christianity. Remember, the Roman Empire started in Africa. It rose in Africa. It fell in Africa. A lot of people need to stop reading some religious books and read some straight history without fable, without supposition, without myth. Read straight history. Read the Mediterranean world in ancient times. She's a racist bigot, but her chronology is good. And there's a good history of the European trying to move out of Europe into the Mediterranean to find something to eat, to put on that gosh darn awful European food. He has solved his problem at the expense of other people. The slave trade liberated Europe from the depressed economy they had created with the so-called Crusades and through the famines and the plagues. Europe always solves its problems by preying on people outside of Europe. They are in a position right now that they have betrayed true socialism, which was not of European origin in the first place. And some people are confused between Karl Marx and Groucho Marx. I think a lot of people are Groucho Marxism instead of Karl Marxism. They're funny people. And if you think that that system started in Europe, no system as humane as socialism could have started among a bunch of icebox people who prey on their brothers for their breakfast. Read Kwame Colson's work, The History of the Modern World, especially the early chapters. Now, the evidence of Africans in the New World, the evidence of 1,000 years of civilization before slavery, all of this I'm not discussing because there is no time. But when the Romans disgraced themselves in the mismanagement of Christianity, they created a vacuum. Islam moved into that vacuum. The Africans thought that Islam would get the Romans off of their back. They were right. Islam got the Romans off of their back, and the Arabs jumped on their back, and they're still there, using Islam to justify it. Now, the African military man, because we are the greatest fighting machine in the face of the earth, if we ever discovered this, people are going to start running. Under proper leadership, proper inspiration, properly equipped, the black man is the greatest human fighting machine God ever created, if indeed God created it. I think the gods of Africa created it. Once you lose track of your heritage, you lose track of your liberty in this world.
I think we need to hear that again, especially us black men. So let's hear it again.
From the depressed economy they had created with the so-called Crusades and through the famines and the plagues. Europe always solves its problems by preying on people outside of Europe. They are in a position right now that they have betrayed true socialism, which was not of European origin in the first place. And some people are confused between Karl Marx and Groucho Marx. I think a lot of people are Groucho Marxism instead of Karl Marxism. They're funny people. And if you think that that system started in Europe, no system as humane as socialism could have started among a bunch of icebox people who prey on their brothers for their breakfast.
Remember, Americans, white Americans are European.
Work, the history of the modern world, especially the early.
So when he starts talking about Europe, he's talking about the original homeland of the modern white man and woman. These white Americans over here in America over here in America are Europeans. Their heritage goes back to Europe. Their ancestry goes back to Europe, not America. So you need to keep that in mind. He's not talking about some people over in Europe. He's using that term as a generic ethnic term, as a generalized ethnic term to describe white people all over the world. Again, we're not saying that all white people are racists or devils, but he's keeping it real. He's just telling the truth about what took place in the world and about what's going on in the world today. And this is what he's talking about. But he's going to get to that part about the black man being the world's first warrior. Okay?
Chapters. Now, the evidence of Africans in the New World, the evidence of 1,000 years of civilization before slavery, all of this I'm not discussing because there is no time. But when the Romans disgraced themselves in the mismanagement of Christianity, they created a vacuum. Islam moved into that vacuum. The Africans thought that Islam would get the Romans off of their back. They were right. Islam got the Romans off of their back, and the Arabs jumped on their back, and they're still there, using Islam to justify it. Now, the African military man, because we are the greatest fighting machine in the face of the earth, if we ever discovered this, people are going to start running. Under proper leadership, proper inspiration, properly equipped, the black man is the greatest human fighting machine God ever created, if indeed God created it. I think the gods of Africa created it. Once you lose track of your heritage, you lose track of your liberty in this world. The Europeans doing the slave trade not only read the African out of history, they colonized history, they colonized information about history. They colonized image. They colonized the image of God. Who told you Christ was white? He was born in that part of the world predominantly occupied by non-European people. So you should not get into the argument about whether he's white. All you have to say, was he a Greek? No. Was he a Roman? No. But these were the only people partially white in the area at the time. If he wasn't a Greek, he wasn't a Roman, he was one of those other people. You don't have to argue about the shades of color. So far as you're concerned, once you establish he was not a Roman, he was not a Greek, your conversation is over.
Now he's talking about Christ to relate to some of the people that actually believe in Jesus Christ. But there is scant historical evidence, meaning there is not much hard historical evidence for the existence of an actual man named Jesus Christ. There are no tombs or burial remnants or remains of his so-called Mother Mary, his father, whatever Christians want to call it, his spiritual father, his stepfather Joseph, who would really be his real father. The story about some angel and some immaculate conception is also propaganda. We know as people, all men are born and conceived from a foundation of sexual intercourse between two real people. Facts. But if you want to believe the propaganda, understand that you have no proof. You can't prove it. You're just believing something that's written in the pages of a book, and men write books. No magical invisible finger came down and wrote the Bible. Even people that teach the Bible, they don't ever say a magical hand came down and wrote the Bible. They say men wrote the Bible, and those men were so-called inspired by God. Now, how the hell you can know that any man was inspired to do anything is beyond me. How you people that go around saying the Bible is the divinely inspired word of God that he left up to man to write, man with all of his faults and all of his shortcomings, this God left it up to men to write it. Men like to lie. Men write books. Gods don't write books. So men wrote the book. And how you know that those men were divinely inspired by, how you know those men were inspired by God, how you know that is mind-boggling and insane to me, that you know that. You absolutely know those men were. How can you know what any man or woman is inspired to do unless you lived inside their brain and body? That's the only way you can know what inspired them to do anything. How about they were inspired by a political movement to grab power in one region of the world or another? And there's nothing like a religion where you tell people God wants you to do this. There's nothing like that. And you give them some words written in a book and you say, God told me to write these words and give it to you. There's nothing like that to rally the troops and to get people all inspired and motivated, telling them that God told you to say it. So this is very strange to me. He's talking about Christ as if Christ actually existed. But in his other lectures, he actually says out of his mouth, I'm speaking about this Christ right now, but there is a question as to whether this person in the Bible actually existed at all. And he says it out of his mouth in some of his other lectures. But he's trying to relate to people that are inside Christianity to at least get their minds off of the white Jesus, because so many black churches still have the image of the white Jesus up in their church. So many black people still have a white Jesus on the walls of their homes, still to this very day. So he's trying to at least get those people's minds to change from that paradigm, to understand that at least the mythology is even false. Even that mythology is false. Because like I said before, later on, he even discusses and he even says that the jury is still out. There's still not enough hard evidence. There are no tombs of his relatives, no burial remains of Mary, Joseph, his brother James. There's nothing. There's no evidence. Even though people like to use the Bible as evidence, the Bible is not evidence of anything. The Bible is a book written by men to promote an agenda, period. The Bible is not a history book. It makes loose references to things in history. That's like saying Spider-Man is a real character because he swings from the Empire State Building. We know the Empire State Building is for real, but Spider-Man is a made-up character. Jesus is real because he walked around in Jerusalem. No, we know Jerusalem is real, but we don't have a whole lot of evidence other than the Bible to corroborate the authenticity of this Jesus. Keep in mind that this same Jesus story was told thousands of years, the birth of a virgin, a great godlike man with the power to heal that led people and taught people. That story has been told several times throughout the ages. And this Jesus in Christianity is just the last one that has this same story of a Savior being born, of a virgin with magical, mystical powers. The first one comes out of our homeland in Egypt. The story of Asar, Aset, and Heru. The first Trinity. The Trinity of man, woman, and child. No spirit ghosts. The Trinity of man, woman, and child. I digress. I'll let the doctor finish his lecture.
Now, if somebody else want to argue about his shade, well, that's their problem. then if you got a problem with color, then you got a problem with your mother and your father. You have insulted your mother and your father if you don't like what they gave you. I wear mine like a badge of honor. I dig it. I wear it well.
All right. Love it.
I'm saying in closing, and I am closing, that what you have to do is take a holistic look. Not only at your position in the world, but your potential in the world. You have to learn how to convert everything into an instrument of liberation or leave it alone. You have to realize there was no Greek fraternities and sororities until they were introduced to secret African societies. People get all dewy-eyed over something that was imposed on them in order to control them without understanding that. That's another imperial effort. So it bothers me, and although I have good personal friends who are Muslim, that not a single Muslim scholar have dealt with that 1,000 years of African independence before slavery and how the Arabs from the north systematically destroyed these nations. It did not occur. 1591, from Morocco, an army was launched against these great independent nations in inner West Africa. These were great states. And because of poor communication between African and African, there was enough armies in these states to march down to the coast and to drive every slave trader into the sea. But the communication between African and African was so poor. Even today, the East Africa is not too clear about what's happening in West Africa. And nobody knows what's happening in North Africa because the conspiracy to hold on to Africa is happening in South Africa and in North Africa. So the whites in North and South Africa willing to play a part, and the pseudo-whites in North Africa willing to play a part.
The pseudo-whites in North Africa playing a part to control the continent. Those are Arabs. That's who he's talking about. And the straight-up white South Africans in South Africa that are still trying to maintain a stranglehold in South Africa and are still trying to keep their apartheid system in place to this very day in secretive ways.
In all this world, you have no friends. But if there are a billion of you on the face of this earth scattered all over the world, what do you need with a friend other than yourself? Why can't you turn inward on yourself and say, I will wear no clothes I don't produce. Start with your underwear. I wear no shoes that's not made by a brother. You're creating a shoe factory, employment at once. Start buying aeroplanes, break them down and study them, later on make aeroplanes. What this whole thing is about is the restoration of confidence. It has been the role of these handmaidens of colonialism to destroy your confidence in yourself. You don't believe that you can look like a god. You don't believe a black father in your home is to some extent a god. That doesn't make the black woman less than a goddess. Because we produced the first human societies that recognized and respected the female god. We produced the first human society that said you can't be a king unless you got a queen. You can't be a god unless you got a goddess. So you can see all of these social ills that people are defending now, none of it started in our countries. I defy anyone alive, and those who want to come alive, come back and prove me, I invite them too, to show me one single case of sexual deviance or maladjustment any place on the African continent for the coming of foreigners. I defy you to show me one case of teenage pregnancy, one case of ill treatment of women, We got confused with someone else's ideas, someone else's concept and definition of us. What we have to understand is that faith has not spared us for an idle reason. A whole lot of people who've been hit less than us are extinct. What is there in us that made us strong enough to take this heavy blow? 500 years of slavery, one way or the other. Slavery, neo-colonialism. What made us strong enough to survive? What is faith saved us to do? And inasmuch as we gave the world its first humanity, faith has saved us to give the world its last humanity. What we have to do is to believe it, to believe that we are worthy of it, and to believe that we are capable of it. What black studies should be about, what black religion should be about, is the restoration of the confidence. And the restoration of the confidence is we must rule the state again. There is not an imitation nation, not an independent nation in Africa or the Caribbean Islands. They're all imitation European states. And what we have to understand is that the nation state is stagnant. The African did not live in a nation state, they lived in a territorial state. The African learned something that's very basic. Cultures have to be fertilized by cultures. People have to be fertilized by the interaction between cultures and cultures. This insecure European tightened his borders. You know, you got a passport to come here? The word passport is not in any African language. The things he invented to restrict himself, he imposed on other people. Once we gain confidence in ourselves, and once we look at that person staring back at us from that mirror and like what we see, and don't move from that mirror until you like what you see. Then, in coordination with other African people throughout the world, we will give the world a new lease on life. We will turn to all of our people and not one part of them, because we came from a matrilineal society that respected women to the point that lineage came down to the female side. We must answer the call of the great African-American poet, Margaret Walker, who said, "Let the dirges end, let a new peace begin. Let us write a new covenant for the freedom of ourselves in the world." African men throughout the world need to step forward and answer Sister Margaret and say, "Sister Margaret, we have heard your call. And because we have never been a society that excluded women, with our women at our side, we are ready to pick up the challenge. We are ready to start a revolution that will change the world. We won't get ready tomorrow because tomorrow's things are left to tomorrow. We will start our revolution right now, and we will start it with ourselves." Thank you.
So that was our great master teacher, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, giving you the pure, unadulterated truth of all matters. Now, what I'm going to do next is go to my website, blackafricana.com, because if you want more information about the history with regard to Christianity and how it got started, you can go to blackafricana.com, and information about that is right there. Okay? There are two videos that I'm going to draw your attention to All right. This video here, if you start at,
And the styles for me to come back and
let's continue. Former unified heavyweight champion has not fought since his beef with steroids in it.
I can like you and I can say I can love you as a man who
Start
look in
this
your eyes
video
and really genuinely mean that.
at
when that-
2039.
This
is
I can be as sit here and be as humble as I want, but
This
I
is
know for a fact
2040.
deep down in my soul, it's written in the stars for me to come back
this is a discussion between this white man and a boxer named Deontay Wilder.
and wipe you out in style in America, live on Showtime. And
They start talking about religion, what religions they follow. And you'll see how this white man is disrespectful when he brings up his ancestors. And I stop the video and I give you a brief history of how and where Christianity got started. So start this at around the, as soon as you see these two gentlemen sitting at the table. I think it's at around the, let's take a look. This says 2011, 2111.
I can like you and I
It solidifies the
in style in America,
fights, not just the first fight.
I can be as sit here and be as humble as I
20,
want.
2039, 20 minutes and 39 seconds. And you listen to this whole exchange. In the middle of the exchange, I stop it and I give you a brief history lesson on how and where Christianity got started and what happened during that time. Here in this video, are black people Hebrew Israelites, Christians, or Muslims? Okay, this video
This white supremacy and racism.
is about an hour long. I talk about the origins of the Hebrew faith, who the Hebrew people are, where they came from, and the origins of Christians and Muslims and the original African spirituality. All this is on the free content page. Okay. Now, if you sign up and become a subscriber, you can look at this entire Black World History lesson. It speaks about Ethiopia as being the world's first true civilization. And in this video, I show you the information and I give you the story about the first Jesus Christ figure who was not called Jesus Christ, okay? Historically speaking, the story comes from the drama, the Asarian drama, the story of Asar, the first great African king, god king, Aset, the first great African goddess queen, and Heru, the child born of a virgin that resurrected the dead, made the blind see. Does this sound familiar? Born of a virgin. Born of a virgin, was a great leader. This is the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru. This was 3,000 years before Jesus Christ was born to Mary. So this should tell you that they got this idea of this Jesus figure, the idea, not a real man, but the idea of Jesus came from Africans 3,000 years prior. And this is engraved in the walls of a temple in Egypt, 3,000 years before the Jesus story. And I read the entire story to you and I tell you where it comes from. And there is also information in there about the original Ethiopian civilizations and how they were the first to introduce the idea of worshiping any god, how they were the first to name the planets, how they were the first builders, the first writers of the Medu Neter, and so on and so on. It's in this Black World History lesson. You have to sign up and become a subscriber to be able to get this. But there is a free content page where all of these things are free that you can just watch, listen to, and partake of. Music, free music lessons, free boxing lesson. Parts of these lessons are free. To get the full lessons, you'd have to sign up and become a subscriber. But having said all that, I'm going to bid you adieu and wish you a great afternoon and a good evening and a good night. May the peace and blessings of the great Mother and Father Creator be with you. May the ancestors walk with you to guide you and protect you. And it doesn't really matter what your nationality is. I can get along fine with Arabs that don't seek to be supreme over anyone. I can get along fine with white people that don't want to be supreme over anyone. I can get along with any group of people. It doesn't matter what your color is or your ethnicity is. As long as you fight for freedom, justice, and equality for all people, I can call you my brother or my sister. But you need to be fighting for these things honestly and fighting hard because the world needs it. There's a lot of hidden conspiracies for all you people that like to talk about conspiracy theories. And this COVID-19 thing is a part of it. Make no mistake about it. Having said that, peace, take care of yourselves,